state, teachers, administrators, other educational experts from Massachusetts, parents, students, and other experts in the field from across the country. For those of you who have been watching this process play out over actually several years, you know that this board has a critical decision to make, and the number of opinions on what we should do is nearly as large as the number of people who've come before this board to express their views. However, at the end of the day, and now that day is going to be tomorrow, to be precise, this board is going to render a decision on a single path forward. But before we get to that, we're eager to hear from as many of you who'd like to speak as possible this evening. And before we proceed with that, I'd like to invite the Commissioner to make some opening remarks. His full recommendation was released last week. I'm sure you've seen it. And that was subsequent to the last formal meeting of this board, so I think it's appropriate that he take a few minutes to detail his recommendation that I know many of you want to comment on, and tomorrow we're going to have to make some big decisions about. Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, board members and members of the audience. I'll be relatively brief. Hopefully, people have had a chance to read my recommendation in full. I tried to provide a rationale and a pretty involved explanation for the recommendation that I brought to the State Board of Education. A month ago, when the board met in October, I shared 3 conclusions that I had reached regarding this decision. The first was that MCAS has reached the point of diminishing returns. There's no question in my mind that MCAS has served the Commonwealth well. I can't imagine that we could have a successful system that doesn't set high standards for itself and measure its progress and its achievement against those standards. And MCAS has provided us with that metric. But it's provided us with that metric for 18 years in a row now. MCAS was a terrific 20th century assessment. We now have a better understanding than we did 2 decades ago when we set out with MCAS about learning progressions in mathematics, about text complexity and the interplay of reading and writing, as well as the academic expectations of higher education employers. Now that we have the benefit of those 2 decades of experience, we've upgraded our learning expectations through our 2010 revisions to our curriculum frameworks and content standards. It's time to upgrade our assessments to the new generation. Second conclusion that I shared with the board is that PARCC is a substantial advancement over our current MCAS test. Our goal in joining the PARCC consortium was to be part of a collaboration that would build a next generation assessment, that would secure funding that we were unable to secure ourselves through the state budget back in 2008-2009 when we set out down the road of anticipating the next generation MCAS. We played a leading role in this consortium. Our efforts, Massachusetts' efforts, are reflected in the strong quality of PARCC. In many ways, PARCC sets a higher bar than MCAS for student performance. For those who are concerned that going with PARCC, being part of that PARCC consortium, would represent a lowering of expectations for student achievement in Massachusetts, that's been anything but the case, particularly as students move up the grades in middle and high school. But this higher bar is not simply about being harder. PARCC provides more opportunity for critical thinking, for application of knowledge, for conducting research, and for exploring the connections between reading and writing. I've also observed that the computer-based testing experience is qualitatively different from a paper and pencil test. I've spent time with students while they're taking the test. I've talked to them afterwards. The students report by almost a 2-to-1 margin that the computer-based environment is a more engaging experience. The introduction of audio and video increases accessibility for many students, including students with disabilities and English language learners. And perhaps most importantly, the computer-based setting mirrors the digital world that's ubiquitous in students' lives. The third consideration that I shared with the board in October was that we do need, as we pursue our next generation assessment, to ensure that we control our standards and assessments here in Massachusetts. Many of the public comments that have been shared with the board have helped to convince me of this, as well as the board's discussion as well. And taking those three considerations into account, I've provided to the State Board of Education a set of recommendations that we begin work on the next generation computer-based MCAS assessment. The new test will build on the best elements of both PARCC and MCAS. It will allow us to retain final control over our test content, our testing policies, and test administration procedures. I'm proposing that we incorporate into a procurement for a next generation MCAS contract the services needed to develop a next generation MCAS that will be ready by the spring of 2017 in order to expedite the development process and to be prudent about costs. We will maximize the use of existing PARCC development as well as MCAS test items as appropriate. These would be augmented by additional test items developed to meet our needs. Second of all, that in the spring of 2016, we will continue to have a transitional year as we wait for the 2017 tests to be online across the state. Districts that administer PARCC in spring 2015 will administer PARCC again in 2016, and will again have the option to select computer-based or paper-based versions. Districts that administered MCAS in 2015 will administer MCAS again unless the district affirmatively elects to switch to PARCC, either computer-based or paper-based. The MCAS test in 2016 will be augmented with a limited number of PARCC items that will facilitate statewide comparisons and provide teachers and students in MCAS districts with some initial exposure to these next generation type of assessment questions. Further, my recommendation calls for convening advisory committees representing Massachusetts K-12 teachers, higher ed faculty, assessment experts to advise on the content and test administration policies of this next generation assessment. Among the policies to be reviewed are the content and length of the test, scheduling of test administration windows, testing policies for students with disabilities and English language learners, as well as the requirements for the new high school competency determination. In addition, we'll also discuss the timing for instituting a history and social science test. I don't want to go through all of these specifically. As we did in spring of 2015, districts administering PARCC grades 3 to 8 in the spring of 2016 will be held harmless for any negative changes in their school and district accountability levels. That also applies to our teacher evaluation requirements, where again in the spring of 2016 for districts that administer PARCC, we will set up a hold harmless provision in terms of any PARCC results that contradict and have a negative impact on teachers compared to the other data that evaluators are looked at will be discounted from that evaluation. We anticipate that in the spring of 2017, when we return to a single test for all districts, every district will be subject to accountability level adjustments. In the spring of 2016, we will only offer the MCAS grade 10 test. In order to focus our efforts on the new test development, we'll consult with the advisory committees that we convene to propose a broader range of high school testing options, beginning with the class of 2020, at least with the class of 2019. Students will continue to be responsible for the grade 10 MCAS competency determination requirement. We anticipate that we'll continue to remain an active member of the PARCC Consortium, and that anticipate the continued membership will give us access to high-quality assessment research, new test item development with the cost shared among participating tests. Membership will also provide us with useful multi-state data comparisons. And because we will be contracting with our own testing vendor, we will have the flexibility to leave the consortium at any time that membership is no longer of added value to the Commonwealth. I know there's been concern about the move to online testing and the implications for districts that aren't ready at this point in time. My recommendation calls for being online statewide by the spring 2019 administration to give districts 3 years of lead time. We certainly will track this as we get closer to that deadline. We anticipate that we'll continue to have a paper pencil option at least as an accommodation for students who are unable to access testing online. And so as we get closer to that deadline, I'll keep the board updated as to whether or not this deadline is feasible or not. I've also spoken with Chair Sagan about the possibility of convening a board subcommittee that would be a liaison between me and the board in monitoring, overseeing the implementation of these recommendations as we go forward to ensure that the board feels fully informed and fully engaged in the decision making as it progresses. Mr. Chairman, I think that's a sufficient overview. I'm anxious to hear from members of the audience who have opinions on this recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I think that sets the stage in a way that's very helpful for everyone. The board will have plenty of opportunity to discuss this amongst themselves, so I'm sure you'll get reaction to the thought of a subcommittee from this group tomorrow. I think there were two things that I'd ask you to repeat. For the second, there were clarifications or amplifications of your intent that were not spelled out in the memo because they weren't part of the overall recommendation, but I know there's a great deal of concern with such a potential change going forward among both our teachers who are working very hard in their classrooms to educate children who want to understand what are they judged by and not, and by our superintendents and all of the administrators in the districts who are also worried about it. Some made a decision to test PARCC over the last year or two. Others didn't. They will have to make a decision now for the next year and then know that there's no decision, no choice a year later. And you talked about the full harmless both for districts that have gone already to PARCC and therefore might be in their second year or more, or for educators. I would just like you to repeat that for people because I have a feeling that will be germane to some of the testimony we might have been hearing tonight.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. So consistent with the protocol that we used in the spring of 2015, for districts that administer PARCC in the spring of 2016, regardless of whether they had administered PARCC in the spring of 2015, we will hold those districts harmless, the schools in those districts harmless from any negative consequence in terms of their accountability status in the state's accountability system. We think that because this remains a second year on the road to a spring 2017 next generation MCAS, we think that's only fair that those districts be placed in that situation. Likewise, in terms of our teacher evaluation protocols in the Commonwealth, where, by the way, and this can get pretty weedy pretty quickly, we've set up a system in Massachusetts where we've said that student learning has to be at the center of teacher evaluation, but we've been absolutely hands-off in terms of how that gets measured and how the state's growth scores, year-to-year gains, get rolled into that. Unlike other states, we have not specified a percentage or a requirement. So the state's growth scores, year-to-year gains in students making their reading and math results, have to be taken into account, but have to be taken into account along with a range of other information about how student learning is occurring. And again, Mr. Chairman, very much parallel to what we did last year for districts that administered PARCC for the first time. We will again this year for districts that administer PARCC, whether for the first time or the second time. We will issue guidance to the effect that if in fact those year-to-year growth scores from the PARCC results are out of whack in a negative way from all of the other evidence that the district is looking at, you can discount and discard that information from the weighting of the impact that teachers making on student learning.
All right, we will move to the main event. A few comments about how we're going to operate tonight. First, we will only recognize from the chair individuals who have signed up to speak. Our colleagues from the department will call speakers to the front row. Could I ask you guys to free up these first 4 or 5 seats? Well, no, so what I'm going to do, I have a plan. We're going to call 6 people, 3 in a panel, and I'd like them to seat where Brooke is in these 3 or 4. So you can just move that way if you would. And then the next group, the on-deck circle, should sit up here in these front 3 or 4 seats. And then the speakers should speak one at a time from this microphone. You can speak from that one too, it'll be harder to get there. So that we can go as quickly as possible and get as many people included. So 6 come up, 3 here, 3 there, 3 speak, you leave, this group moves over, and another 3 will come up, and we will keep going until we take a break. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to make a presentation. If you need more than 3 minutes, we invite you to submit everything else in writing, please. You can do that on the web, or you can give it to STEM. As a little helpful reminder, at 2.5 minutes, you'll hear a buzzer that might sound something like, there, something like that. Okay, it'll sound a lot like that. And if you hear that again at 3 minutes, you need to stop time. However, this is mostly an evening where don't sit in that first 2 there rows there. If you could sit anywhere in here, fill this section in would be great. If a board member decides to interrupt you with a question, you can answer it or not, but that time is on us. It won't come from your time. I'll keep track of that in my head. Mostly, we're here to hear from you. We're not here to debate you. We won't be answering your questions. We're here to hear your statements and anything you'd like to present in your time. But if we do ask a question, please try to answer it. One more thought. Finally, I suspect some of you will be tempted to express your support or opposition for some of what you might hear tonight. Frankly, that's not really very helpful to us, and it can, in some circumstances, be really rude to the person who's speaking. And this board expects a respectful process. We've had it consistently, and I'm going to insist on it. So this is how we're going to handle it tonight, consistent with the past. If any supporters for a particular point of view want to take up time with indications of support, that's fine, but it's going to come from that speaker's time. And if you do it at the end of the speaker's time and it's really disruptive, needs up time, that'll just cut back the number of people from that point of view who will get to talk tonight. And if you want to voice opposition to someone who's speaking, do it in your time. But if you interrupt somebody rudely, with boos or cat calls, that person gets to stand there as long as I want till they finish their point. So please let people express themselves with respect. We've had mostly that in most of our meetings, and I'd love to have that tonight. And then we get to hear everybody's views and what they have to say. And that's the most helpful to this board as we try to render a really difficult opinion in a serious way. So if we can all follow those pretty simple rules, we're going to hear from a lot of people. I don't know how many of you have signed up. Our goal is to do this in roughly 3 hours. I'm not sure if we have a curfew and they'll turn out the lights if we need to go a little long, but if so, we'll try to accommodate everybody within reason. As you know, we've stayed late at many of our hearings, and we may extend a little bit. I'll try to give a warning to my board members about breaks and whether we'll go long, and also to all of you if it's really clear that there's so many and we won't get to all of them, so that you aren't endlessly frustrated at the very end. Maybe some frustrated earlier on, but maybe not. So with that, let's get going. I turn it over to staff in the back to call up 6 names, please, and then please come forward.
The first 3 speakers are John Sills, Mary Bork, Tom Gosnow. On deck is Nikki Brown, Yvette Ansa, and Jerry Morose.
Great, and as you come up, we would appreciate it if you repeat your name, where you're from, and if you have an affiliation that you think is germane and you'd like us to know.
Good afternoon. I have been elected to go first.
All right.
My name is Mary Burke, and I am Superintendent of the Chelsea Public Schools and President-elect of the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents. Board of Education members, thank you for allowing me to speak here this afternoon. I am the superintendent of the Gateway City School System, where 86% of our students are children of poverty, 80% are first language not English, and 25% are immigrant in our country less than 40 years. As an urban gateway city school system, I have one of the hardest lifts in closing the achievement gap. I should be fearful to have a more highly rigorous next generation assessment implemented. But in fact, I support it. I believe it is the moral and ethical right decision on behalf of students to implement a next generation standards-based assessment system that improves teaching and learning and prepares all students for college and career success in the 21st century. We are in need of a next generation assessment that prepares all students, urban, suburban, and rural, for modern jobs that require high-level critical thinking, problem-solving, and technology skills. I ask that with the next generation assessment, we do not lose the strongest PARCC assessment. For example, writing linked to reading and assessed in all grades, as well as the assessment of the standards of mathematical practices. As President-elect of MASS, we firmly support the recommendations found in the Mass Position Paper, Conditions and Considerations for a New Generation of Student Assessment in Massachusetts. In addition, we recommend that you seek input of all educators, including superintendents, when examining and informing what we need to continue and where we need to improve the next generation of assessment. MASS strongly recommends that all schools and districts be held harmless. Thank you. For the 2016 school year. The first year results from the 2015 PARCC administration were delayed to well into the fall, and the results we received were only high-level categories and domains. In order to prepare our students well, we need to receive the results prior to the beginning of the school year, with item analyses broken down to the granular question level to help us inform on curriculum alignment, instructional practices, and individual student intervention groupings. The item analyses and corresponding test release questions were a strength in the MCAS that we want to retain moving forward. The lack of these granular results this year has left educators across the state at a major disadvantage as they seek to improve curriculum, instruction, and intervention for student growth and achievement. In short, bring on the next generation assessment and continue to hold harmless one more year, all schools and districts, until technical issues are solved and educators receive the data they need to make instructional moves in response. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
I have to bend down a little bit. John Sills, Superintendent of Schools in Bedford, Mass. Also speaking on behalf of MASS, and thank you for allowing us to speak. As a superintendent of a high-performing suburban district with a relatively large high-needs population, we have 13.2% low income, 5.5% ELL, etc. I too want to reiterate our support for a new generation of assessment. If we are really serious about developing in our students their capacity for creative and critical thinking, for analytical thinking as well, as we in Bedford are, we need assessments that will help us gauge our success, illuminate areas for improvement, and leverage the relevant curricular and instructional changes. Bedford chose to pilot the PARCC exams last year, and we're proud to say that our elementary school, which used paper and pencil, was one of those 76 schools where 80% of its students achieved levels 4 and 5. At the same time, our middle school students who took the computer-based test performed relative to past performances in Bedford in ELA, which have always been high, quite poorly. Unfortunately, this was a miserable experience for the students who got kicked off the test sometimes 15 times in a row, losing 20 minutes worth of writing. They were often in tears. And that's just not a supportable position to go forward. We believe, however, that a next generation assessment should be computer delivered, but it would be unconscionable to hold districts accountable or even publicize the results during the several years, not 1 or 2 years, but several years it will take to work out the many technological problems the new platform will engender. This is why rollout issues are paramount. The next several years must be conceived as a pilot with all that entails. This requires a mindset that sees assessment primarily as an engine of improved instruction rather than as a hammer of accountability. Where the boards direct the department to suspend accountability ratings, while the truly 21st century assessment is created, and while districts address the many multi-year processes of the accompanying technological changes, we're not going to suddenly stop holding ourselves accountable. Our teachers are not going to stop their data analysis of student achievement data to improve instruction. Our schools are not going to stop their many programs aimed at closing achievement gaps. To fear otherwise is to profoundly underestimate the weight of the last 20 years of educational reform and to disrespect those of us in the field. But the recent announcement that districts that chose PARCC last year will be required to stick with PARCC next year. Sorry about that.
So you like that idea?
Quickly, the recent announcement that districts that chose PARCC last year will have to choose it again next year is patently unfair to districts and reveals a rigid mindset of accountability. We were not told this last year when we went out on a limb and chose PARCC. It would be hurtful to students. We received no item analysis, no useful feedback to improve instruction. And so it prioritizes accountability based on unreliable and actually corrupted data over support for teaching and learning. So we urge you to reconsider that aspect of the rollout board going forward. Overall, we urge the board to ground its decision about our next generation assessment and all of the rollout decisions, including what districts will be required to do next year, in a capacity-building mindset rather than an accountability one. Thank you. I'm sorry about that, but I know I got your attention.
No, you did. Thank you. And then maybe we could have the audio person come up and try to get the mic plugged back in after Mr. Gosnell speaks.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, members of the board, and Mr. Commissioner. I've testified twice already. So this one is very brief and probably covering a couple of other items that I haven't mentioned. I am not going to go into all the reasons why AFT Massachusetts does not support PARCC. At our convention last May, which is heavily composed of K-12 teachers, pre-K-12 teachers, they voted unanimously against having PARCC as the exam in Massachusetts. But what I also think is extremely significant is the number of states supporting PARCC have gone from 20 to 6. That says an awful lot. But I'd like to say a few words about high-stakes testing. Look what's going on in Washington. They are in the process, we think, of reauthorizing the ESA legislation. They are dropping their support of high-stakes testing in the sense that they are now requiring anything like that from the states. That's very important. Mr. Secretary Duncan, who has been a strong supporter of testing, says we're overdoing it, we're pulling the joy out of the classroom, we're sucking the joy out of the classroom. I would urge the board to become supporters of a moratorium. I know on high-stakes testing. I know that the legislature has that authority, but boy, it would be great if you folks came out and supported that. Moving forward, if we look at all these issues regarding testing and create committees, I would suggest that since it is widely asserted that the classroom teacher is the most important person in school in students' academic achievement, that any committee be composed of a majority of classroom teachers. That is not meant to exclude others. Parents, students, administrators are also very important. But I emphasize again, I hear over and over that the classroom teacher is the most important person in the academic achievement of the kids. So shouldn't they have the most important say? So thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.
Have a good time making your decision.
Thank you. We're going to call 3 more names as the next 3 come up. I'm not sure we've quite got this seating thing working yet. We'll try one more trio. Call for you.
Sure. After this, we'll hear from Representative Marjorie Decker and Senator Patricia Jalen. Following the Senator and the Representative, we'll hear from Tara Bennett, Bill Bain, and Lena Simone.
All right, next panel.
Hello, my name is Mike Barnes, Seven Hills Charter Public School in Worcester. I brought some scholars with me in the 8th grade whose opinions probably differ from mine, but I told them just to write down whatever they felt about PARCC and to reflect on it last spring. Our school took PARCC grades 3 through 8 fully online last spring. We committed to that. We're just getting the data and looking at it, the past couple of weeks. My opinion around PARCC is that the PARCC test is a solid test, that it assessed the kind of critical thinking that the Common Core is requiring at a higher level of expectations than MCAS did, so I support it in that regard. At Seven Hills, where we struggled was with the timing of the test. We actually found that 22%, it was 22% in the performance-based assessment, 18% end of year, never finished the test, and those were our scholars who had to take the test time for the first time, having taken MCAS before without any time limit. Our special education ELL students, of which we have a high percentage at Seven Hills, they managed to finish the test because the test for them was not timed. But our non-special ed, non-English language learner scholars had a very difficult time finishing the test in the minutes. So I would encourage, moving forward, if we adopt MCAS 2.0, that Massachusetts would have control over the timing and would be able to go back to having on-time testing. We teach a lot of strategies around close reading in the Readers and Writers Workshop that just slows things down with the way that our scholars read, and they're not really allowed to employ those strategies on a timed test. I have 3 things that I would encourage for the board. Please adjust the 2011 to 2017 gap-having trajectory. I understand, and this is the first time I've heard this evening, that we'll be held harmless again next year. I'm happy about that decision, Dr. Chester. So that I think is a really good decision, but I think that trajectory that was established back in 2011 is going to need to be readjusted based on the new kind of assessment that we're giving, or have a moratorium on that accountability system for a while. Make the test on time for all scholars, and I also think that the test should be kept online. I like the plan to make it online by 2019 or even earlier. For us, it wasn't a huge challenge. We don't have one-to-one, most districts don't. We rotated students through computer labs, and we made it work that way since we had a long testing window. So we were able to make it work with the laptops in our wireless network. We did run into some problems our scholars might talk about with the technology getting kicked off, but I feel like with more time, then we understood it was a field test, it was a trial, and it will get better next year. Thank you.
Well, I'm Vicki Brown, and Massachusetts should not accept PARCC as its new standardized test. Yes, the world is evolving into using technology for practically everything, but using the internet in schools is a challenge, especially when a lot of children use it around the same time. The time limit is a pain, and the questions themselves are incredibly difficult. I, being one of many kids, to take the test had various problems while taking it. First of all, the internet is slow, therefore it takes a long loading time, meaning less time to finish. Second, while I was taking the test, I noticed many people had a hard time just logging in, which meant less time to take tests, which isn't at all fair because it wasn't set up right, and they had less time even though they couldn't actually start. Lastly, the problems on the tests on the actual test were really difficult, especially since some of the things we hadn't even learned. Also because we were quizzed on things we hadn't been taught, most people did not finish the test and had lower scores, leading people to think that the child wasn't as smart as others.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on one second.
My name is Yvette Ansah, and so the PARCC, or Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, was a test suggested by a group of college professors. But was this idea to create the test in fact advantageous? Yes and no for numerous reasons. The PARCC test teaches students problem-solving skills, allowing them to be able to apply their knowledge rather than just memorize facts on a specific topic. PARCC also allows for college readiness. The test was essentially formulated by some 800 colleges verifying that students are ready for college at an early age. The innovative PARCC test isn't like any other test. Students use computers instead of the original hand-crimping MCAS that was on paper. It is also less reliant on multiple choice and more concentrated on new types of questions that are far more interactive. For me, this will help me stay engaged in the test and not feel as if every question is multiple choice. Although there are many beneficial aspects of the PARCC test, there are also many cons as well. While the PARCC test taken on computers is a pro, it is also a con. Many schools are struggling to pull together computers, properly equipped testing rooms, and Wi-Fi. Another problem that surfaces is the test materials, such as calculator. They are vastly unwieldy and dissimilar from what we routinely use on a daily basis. The confusing materials can derail the figuring process, consonanting mistakes and incorrect answers. Some students that come from a background where they don't use technology may not have experience with computer-based tests such as PARCC. In conclusion, the PARCC test is advantageous in many ways, but also imperfect in other ways. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anil Zibu. So last year, my school, Seven Hills Tri Public School, has switched from MCAS, Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System, to PARCC. To further my knowledge of PARCC, I did some online research. PARCC is an assessment used to test students of all achievement levels on what the lessons teachers have been educating them throughout the year. Due to the fact that many states have been accepting more rigorous academic principles to use in their usual instruction, those states need a higher quality standard, and thus PARCC was born. However, is this test really expedient for us students? To start off, I believe PARCC is beneficial for us students, but somewhere along the lines, it does have some kinks that could use some adjustments. The PARCC assessment does allow students, parents, teachers, and the school to see whether the student is actually understanding the concepts they're learning at school. This helps guide the teachers on what they need to improve in their teaching, what the school needs to improve in their learning system, and what parents can do to help better their child's education. However, then this thought comes to mind. Some students on the test may not be what the students have seen before, or is put in a way that the students have no clue what it means. Since this test is taken towards the end of the year, the student feels like they've learned what they should have needed to learn. Then they take the test and see the questions and feel as if they've been sucked into a black hole. Then they take the test, and on top of that, it's time, which is completely understandable. But introducing this new testing format to students who've been taking this test for more than 4 years wasn't all that great. I feel like it could have at least taken some time test prep in place of SBS last year to get us used to it. Also, PARCC does get us ready for college, even though I'm only in 8th grade and I'm still trying to figure out what high school I'm going to. This very innovative design, the test is very innovative, and its design helps the students keep more focused and organized. However, the fact that it's on computer it has some very difficulties. Like the Wi-Fi, it lags sometimes, and sometimes you feel like when you don't start on time, you feel like you're behind. And soon enough, you're panicking. Ultimately, I believe PARCC has advantages and disadvantages. It gives the students a more talented test that we aim to excel on. It also gives the school information on how they can help advance its learning school. Overall, PARCC isn't so bad, and it holds many favorable elements. I do believe its assumptions are sufficient for our students, but it can use some improvements. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure whichever high school you pick